I am honored to be bringing you today's chapel message. I I always like to start with an Old Testament story. It's been a while since I spoke in chapel. Some of you may not know that. My father was an Old Testament professor. I feel like a lot of times we hear stories, we hear all the New Testament stories, and it's uh, it's something I like to bring. So I was going to pull out an Old Testament text for you and talk some about the story of David. But it turned out the message that I have to bring is from like the whole book of Samuel. So it's a little bit too much text. So I'm going to paraphrase for you the story. And really, what I want to focus on is the relationship between Saul and David. So Saul was chosen as the first king of Israel. Samuel came and anointed him, and Saul became king. And he was what everybody expected a king to be. And he was tall, and he was a warrior, and it turned out once Saul became king, he sort of turned from the path that God would have for him, and he became proud, and and God sent Samuel actually while Saul was still king to go and anoint a new king to replace Saul, and the new king was David. So David showed up, and actually when this it says the Spirit left Saul, and like the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament at this time, it says that the Spirit would come on people in power. I mean, that was the whole deal with Samson, and he would become incredibly strong, and that the Spirit had left Saul, and God said an evil spirit replaced it, and Saul would have bad mood, and so David shows up. Uh, they say, hey, David plays the lyre, and when he plays, it'll calm the spirit. And it did, and it worked for a while. Then you have the David and Goliath, and like David becomes a big war hero, and Saul becomes increasingly concerned for his own position as king, which is just another sort of a symbol or a way in which Saul has turned away from being the king that God wanted him to be. And so uh, one day while David is playing for Saul, Saul has a fit and actually pulls out a spear and tries to kill David, and David flees, and Saul actually pursues David for a long time. The whole rest of Saul's reign, every once in a while, he figures out where David is, and he goes to kill David. And David's response is always to run away, and he runs and he hides, and he gets help from other people. So there comes a point where Saul is hunting David, and Saul needs to go to the bathroom. So he goes into a cave, and it turns out he leaves his men outside for privacy and goes into the cave where David is hiding with his men. And so Saul's in there relieving himself, and David's men are like, "Here he is! God has delivered him to us." And David sneaks up behind him, and he cuts off a corner of Saul's cloak. He refuses to kill him, cuts off a corner of Saul's cloak, and the the writer says at that point David he felt bad, he felt guilty about cutting Saul's cloak. So when Saul leaves, David gets up on a hill from far enough away that Saul can't just stab him, and look, I cut off a corner of your coat. Why are you hunting me down? I've never done anything wrong to you, and you keep trying to kill me. Uh, and and Saul actually repents. Well, repents. He admits his guilt in that moment. Although we find out just a couple of chapters later, Saul's hunting David down again, and actually the same sort of thing happens again. Saul is makes camp, and he's sleeping with his men around him who are supposed to be guarding him. And David's and his men sneak up, and they see them. There's Saul. There's dead, and David's men are like, "Let us kill him." And David says, "No, like I'm not going to strike God's anointed. This is the one who's king, and I'm not going to attack him." So he steals a spear and a water bottle from right near Saul, and then later he yells out, "Hey, look! I could have killed you. Why are you hunting me down?" And for the whole rest of Saul's reign, Saul is trying to kill David, and David won't even raise a hand against him. And I find this to be extraordinary because it's not ordinary behavior. Uh, and we see this as a beautiful picture. David is called in the Bible as someone close to God's heart, and he was not without his faults. He messed up from time to time, but even when he became a hero and victorious and eventually king, he he knew how to humble himself before God, and he understood his position as a servant of God. And as we move into the New Testament and our relationship with God, we understand like we're saved by God, and He's given us so much that there's no way we could ever repay Him. And this is one of the things that should motivate our love for each other. So I was looking actually when I started preparing for this message, I was looking in Luke because we had done a passage for NHS in Luke chapter 6. And I originally thought that that would be my message for today, was about being careful what goes into you, because that's what comes out. Except that as I was reading, the passage that really stood out to me, that I think God wanted me to share, is actually Luke chapter 6, starting verse 27, where Jesus is talking, and he says, "But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those that hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you. If anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful." And this is an amazing passage, because I talk to Mr. Spiegel occasionally, who has decided pacifism is the way he wants to go with that, and I can't fault him from that position biblically, for all that. Now, I mean, my position is there are times where violence is justified, and I think Scripture lays out some situations where God called people to more violent. Although those examples happen in the Old Testament, and I can't fault him for his position. Like it's certainly not my job to decide when someone should be punished for how they treated me. I suppose I've been given authority in my classroom. So if somebody's disobeying the rules in my classroom, if somebody mistreats me, shows disrespect to the teacher, like I've been given that authority from above me, and there are ways in which I've been given authority to judge others. But for personal slights or personal wrongs, like I don't have that authority, and that's what that's part of what Jesus is saying here, and you'll find it other things in what Jesus says in the New Testament. Like it's not our job to look out for ourselves; it's our job to look out for others. And if you listen to secular theory, they'll tell you, look out for number one, which means yourself, and look out for yourself. And once you've got yourself squared away, then you can take care of other people. And part of the problem is that sort of selfishness just feeds itself. You're never going to be okay enough to where it doesn't hurt. You're never going to reach the point where it's not a sacrifice to help others. But if you want to be like Jesus, and if you want to obey Jesus, then when you see somebody in need, you can't help but feel compassion for them. And we see that in the story in Jesus' life too. He was always so busy, and everybody always needed things from him, and he craved those times where he could get alone and be alone with his Father. But then the people would be there, and it says Jesus would have compassion on them, and their needs were so great that he couldn't help but feel the love. And we have the parable of the ungrateful debtor, and he owes so much to the king, and the king forgives him his debt, and then he goes out and he gets all bent out of shape, because even though he had been forgiven his huge debt, Um, Somebody he knows owes him a tiny little bit of money, and he gets all bent out of shape about it, and we behave like that. The grace that we have been given so far exceeds the wrong we should overflow with such gratefulness from God that we cannot help but show love for everyone around us, and that's what we see exemplified here in these commandments. I was reading also about love in John, where John actually goes so far as to say anyone who claims to be in the light but hates a brother or sister is still in darkness. Like it's John, he says stuff straight out, which is always great. But he basically says if you can manage to hate your brother or sister, the the love of Jesus is not in you, and like we want to. That's scary. That's scary talk. So this is the message that I have to bring for you today. It's like David, just like David, and just like Jesus says, like it's so easy as we go through our lives to develop bitterness, and we have enemies, and we want to see bad things happen to them. But the message we learn from Jesus is the people who are hardest for us to love are the people we ought to love the most. You should try to be like Jesus, and you should try to be like David, and after God's own heart, and remember where you come from, and reach out to help people in need, just as God reached out to help you. Be merciful as your Father is merciful.